Welcome back to the library. The Sunwell is one of the most important places in World of Warcraft. It was the source of arcane power that helped the High Elves build their mighty kingdom of Quel'Thalas. And now, with Xal'atath turning her attention towards it, the Sunwell is back in the spotlight. In this video, we're taking a look at the Sunwell's full history, how it was made, why it matters, how it was lost, and then how it returned. Whether you're refreshing your memory or jumping into Azeroth for the first time in the Midnight expansion, this video will give you a clear picture of what the Sunwell is and why it's so important. To understand where the Sunwell comes from, we need to go back to the time, and yes, you guys guessed it, of the War of the Ancients. I know, we have covered this topic more times than I have had roast dinners, and I'm British, so you know that's a lot. But for the sake of everyone's sanity, I think we should skip over the War of the Ancients lore and just focus on a speed run of what is relevant. The story of the Sunwell begins with its predecessor, the Well of Eternity. This was a vast reservoir of raw arcane energy formed from the very lifeblood of Azeroth's world soul. That overflowing arcane energy seeped into the land, transforming everything around it, including a tribe of dark trolls that were living nearby. Under its influence, they evolved into the Night Elves, the elves who went on to build the mighty Kaldorite Empire, all powered by the Well of Eternity. But as with many great empires, their ambition grew dangerous. They pushed it too far, delving way deeper into the Well's power than they ever should have. This reckless tapping of arcane energy drew the attention of the Burning Legion, the vast demonic army led by the fallen titan Sargeras. The Legion's ultimate mission was to wipe out every world soul in the universe before the Void Lords could corrupt them. The Queen of the Night Elves and her loyal Highborn opened a portal within the Well of Eternity, allowing the Burning Legion to invade and igniting the War of the Ancients. The Resistance eventually pushed the Legion back to the Well. There, Malfurion Stormrage reversed the portal's flow, dragging the demons back to where they came from. Malfurion's brother, Illidan Stormrage, collected 5 vials of its arcane waters. He was right to do so because moments later, the Well imploded, triggering an event known as the Great Sundering, destroying most of the supercontinent of Kalimdor and reshaping the world into the continents we know today. After the war, convinced Azeroth would need another source of arcane power, Illidan travelled to Mount Hyjal and poured the stolen vials of the water into a lake there. By the time he had emptied the 3rd vial, the lake had already transformed into a second Well of Eternity. So that was a bit of a speedrun about the War of the Ancients, but back to the story. The crucial part from all of this is that Illidan Stormrage only used 3 vials containing the water of the original Well of Eternity. The other 2 remained unaccounted for, and those last 2 vials would one day become the foundation of the Sunwell. In the centuries after the creation of this second well, the Night Elves rebuilt their society around Druidism. The use of arcane magic was completely forbidden, and breaking that law was punishable by death. The Highborn's leader at the time, Dath'Remar Sunstrider, and his loyal followers openly defied this ban, practicing arcane magic again and again. But the other Night Elves couldn't bring themselves to execute so many of their own people, so they chose to exile the disobeying Highborn instead. And although many of the Highborn accepted this banishment willingly, what some of them didn't fully understand is that this banishment meant being completely cut off from the energies of the second Well of Eternity, and more importantly, cut off from the blessings that were placed on the tree planted to protect the Well of Eternity. The blessings bestowed upon Nordrassil granted the Night Elves things like immortality and immunity to aging, sickness, and disease. But here is where the story really picks up. Before departing, the Highborn leader Dath'Remar managed to steal one of Illidan's vials of water from the original Well of Eternity. With the vial in hand, Dath'Remar Sunstrider ordered the construction of a great fleet, and they soon set sail into the unknown. After spending years at sea, they finally reached a new landmass that would later become known as the Eastern Kingdoms. The Highborn quickly sensed powerful ley lines running beneath the earth. Ley lines are currents of arcane energy that flow beneath the world's surface. They exist all over Azeroth, and they hold a deep natural power that mages and other spellcasters can tap into for their workings. Having lost the immortality granted to them after leaving the proximity to Nordrassil, the Highborn had begun aging, losing their strength and shrinking in size. They hoped that by mastering some of these ley lines, they might be able to reclaim some of what they had lost. After years of wandering, scouts discovered a region filled with lush forests and, more importantly, strong, pure, and stable ley lines. A nexus of powerful ley lines hidden within the northern forests. Currents of arcane energy converged there, and Dath'Remar declared it was the perfect place to start again. And then came his big revelation. He revealed Illidan's stolen vial, the water of pure energy from the original Well of Eternity. Before his closest followers could even grasp the enormity of what he held in his hands, Dath'Remar emptied the vial into a small lake at the heart of the Nexus. The reaction was immediate, and light burst through the canopy and tore into the sky. Arcane power surged through the forest, and a new source of magic had been created. The Highborn named it in honour of their leader, their tough journey, and the rebirth of their people. They called it the Sunwell. In time, they took on a new name and started calling themselves the High Elves, and drawing upon the arcane strength from the Sunwell, they surged to levels they had never imagined. The elven city of Silvermoon soon rose across the northern forests, and their influence spread outward as they reclaimed and reshaped the land around them. A land that they would name as the High Home. In their own tongue, it would be called Quel'Thalas. To protect their new kingdom, the High Elves turned to the Sunwell's power yet again. Along the borders of Quel'Thalas, they raised massive runestones, towering monoliths that carried the Sunwell's energy outward and shaped it into a protective barrier around the entire realm. This shield masked their arcane presence from threats like the Burning Legion and helped guard their forests from invasion. This shield would be named Bandonorial and would go on to protect their new kingdom for the next 6,000 years. Over that time period, the Sunwell sustained the High Elves to the point where the magic touched every part of their daily life, their culture, their spells, even their physical health. Because of this, the High Elves cherished and defended the Sunwell fiercely, and the High Elves came to believe that their shield was unbreakable, until a far greater threat emerged during the invasion of Azeroth. So we need to fast forward to year 6 on Azeroth's timeline. By this point, the Orcish Horde had stormed through the Dark Portal, destroyed the Kingdom of Stormwind, and were pushing deep into Lordaeron. But before the campaigns in the north could break out, the Orcs encountered the Amani Trolls. The two forces quickly bonded over their shared hatred of the Alliance, and with the Amani Trolls guiding the Horde through the mountains, the Horde soon reached the borders of Quel'Thalas. It was there that their casters realised something unexpected. Their magic didn't work. Death Knights, Warlocks, and Troll Witch Doctors all found their spells dampened to the point where they were useless. Cho'Gall and Gul'dan quickly identified the cause, the massive arcane barrier of Bandonorial, powered by the runestones linked to the Sunwell. Now, without their full powers, the Orcs hatched a new plan: march on the kingdom the old school way, with sword and shield. But this plan was unsuccessful. The might of Quel'Thalas was too much, and Doomhammer grew frustrated with the siege, realizing it was wasting time and contributing nothing to his main objective. Eventually, he ordered the Horde to withdraw and returned focus to the capital city of Lordaeron in the south. And so, Quel'Thalas had survived its first real threat, and the Sunwell was still standing. But this victory would only be temporary. Less than 15 years later, the Scourge began its assault on Lordaeron. But for the Sunwell itself, the story picks back up with Prince Arthas Menethil. After taking up the cursed runeblade of Frostmourne in Northrend, he became one of the most terrifying Death Knights Azeroth has ever seen. He then returned home to Lordaeron, murdered his father, and brought the kingdom to ruin. Once the human kingdom was in ashes, Arthas received his next command from Tichondrius, leader of the Dreadlords. He was to resurrect a necromancer he had personally slain a few months earlier. The necromancer was, of course, Kel'Thuzad. once an archmage of the Kirin Tor, later banished for diving too deep into forbidden magic, and ultimately the first mortal to pledge himself to the Lich King. Resurrecting Quel'Thas would give the Burning Legion a servant on Azeroth powerful enough to summon the Demon Lord Archimonde, opening the way for the Legion's planned second invasion of Azeroth. But resurrecting Quel'Thas required a place of immense magical power, and that's when Tichondrius revealed the location Arthas would need to do this: the Sunwell. To reach the Sunwell, Arthas needed to break through the defences that had once stopped the Horde and the Amani Trolls. Bandonorial had protected Quel'Thalas for millennia. Among the High Elven Magisters, there was an elf named Dar'Karn Drathir, a bitter and ambitious magister who believed he had been denied the power and recognition he deserved. Seeing this greed as vulnerability, Arthas played directly into his ego, promising him everything he thought he was owed in exchange for his loyalty, and Dar'Karn accepted without hesitation. Dar'Karn decided to provide him with the location of the Key of the Three Moons, a magical construct split into 3 crystals. If combined together, they could overpower Bandonorial and open the ancient elf gates. With the elves' greatest barrier now compromised from the inside, Arthas used the Key of the Three Moons to weaken the barrier just long enough to break through. Grand Magister Belovir tried to relay warnings of what was coming to the leadership in the north, but his message was too late. The High Elf traitor Dar'Karn had travelled there and already murdered half of the High Elven leadership near the Sunwell Plateau. Facing disaster, the king, Anastarian Sunstrider, and his remaining leaders abandoned the capital and retreated to the Isle of Quel'Thalas in the north. But as we know, Arthas wasn't far behind. He created a frozen bridge across the sea, connecting the mainland to the Isle of Quel'Thalas. It was on that bridge that King Anastarian made his final stand, but Arthas and Frostmourne proved too powerful and slayed him there and then. After the death of their king, nothing stood between Arthas and the Sunwell, and as expected, the Sunwell's energies were powerful enough to resurrect the Necromancer, who was reborn as a Lich.
The Lich King has granted me eternal life.
This horrifying event corrupted the Sunwell. Its light darkened and the corruption began seeping into the kingdom. When the late king, Anastarian's son, Prince Kael'thas, returned home, he found his kingdom devastated and his people dying. Not from the Scourge and not from the plague, but from the Sunwell itself. Its corrupted energies were slowly killing every surviving High Elf. So Kael'thas made a terrifying choice. The Sunwell had to be destroyed. He then named Dath'Remar Theron as regent and ordered him to protect the survivors. Kael'thas also gave his people a new name, the Sindori. In our tongue, it means the Blood Elves, a name to honour and remember those who had died defending their homeland. But destroying the Sunwell came with consequences no one predicted. The elves had relied on this magic for thousands of years. Without it, they suffered agonizing withdrawal, just like they did when they left the Well of Eternity behind. Many grew weak or sick, and their civilization was soon on the brink of collapse. But there was one last hope. The energies of the Sunwell had not been fully wiped out, and history begins to repeat itself. Just as Illidan had done when he saved some of the water from the original Well of Eternity, the Red Dragon, Kael'thas, gathered what little remained of the Sunwell's pure essence and hid it away in the form of a young human girl named Anveena Teague. Now, when I first dug into the lore of Anveena Teague, I'll be honest, I was pretty confused. On paper, she shows up as this ordinary human girl living in Tarren Mill, a peasant, no magic, no special heritage, just a girl. Except that wasn't the truth at all. Anveena wasn't human. Kael'thas had created an illusion, a vessel to hide the last pure spark of the Sunwell. A living shell meant to protect its essence from anyone who might try to reclaim it. She wasn't meant to be real, but then something unexpected happened. She became real. Feelings, thoughts, free will, a personality. Somehow the raw arcane essence started developing a life of its own. During what she believed was an ordinary day in Hillsbrad, Anveena stumbled across the blue dragon Kael'thas trapped in a net of dragon hunters. She helped him escape, but when the two returned to her home, they found Taran Mill burning. The raiders were being led by Darkhan Drathir, the very same High Elf who had betrayed Quel'Thalas during the Scourge invasion. He had been hunting for the rumoured surviving traces of the Sunwell, and when he got close enough, he sensed exactly what Anveena really was. Darkhan captured her and dragged her back to Quel'Thalas, to the very place she belonged. There he began tearing at the energies inside of her, trying to reclaim the Sunwell's power for himself. But that would be his final mistake. As he tried to drain her powers, Anveena's true nature awakened. She realised what she was, and in a single blast of raw arcane fury, she wiped him from existence. With Darkhan gone, Corielstraz finally revealed himself and explained everything. How he had hidden the Sunwell's essence inside of Anveena, and why. Soon afterwards, Anveena and Kael'thas were both brought under the protection of the Regent Lord Lor'themar, and then moved to a secure, undisclosed location in Quel'Thalas. And honestly, I wish I could say the story wraps up there. But we all know that's not how the world of Warcraft works. What happens next would be the most important moment for the Sunwell. To understand where the Sunwell story goes after its power was hidden away in the forests of Quel'Thalas, we need to follow what happened during the later stages of the Third War and the journey of the last true prince of the High Elves, Kael'thas Sunstrider. Kael'thas and his closest Blood Elves left Quel'Thalas and joined the Alliance resistance, hoping to protect what was left of his people. Kael'thas and his Blood Elves then found themselves on the barren wastelands of Hellfire Peninsula, where Lady Vash explained that this broken world was called Outland, and it was once the orcish home of Draenor before it was destroyed. Before long they found Illidan Stormrage, who had fled here to hide from Kil'jaeden after failing to complete his task of destroying the Frozen Throne and the Lich King. Kael'thas had hoped that Illidan could cure the Blood Elves of their growing addiction to magic, but Illidan told him that that was not possible. But he did promise that if Kael'thas joined him, he would provide the Blood Elves with enough magical energy to keep their hunger under control forever. Hearing this, he pledged his and his people's loyalty to Illidan Stormrage. Kael'thas later established a new homeland for the Blood Elves there, and soon after around 15% of the Blood Elf population had followed their prince into Outland, slowly rebuilding their society there. But Kael'thas had not forgotten about the people he left behind in Azeroth. He sent one of his loyal followers and powerful mage, Grand Magister Romath, back to Azeroth to achieve two missions. The first one, spread Illidan's teachings of draining magical power, a technique the Blood Elves could use to regain their strength, and two, use this newfound strength to restore the kingdom after the Third War. As a result of this mission, Quel'Thalas was finally showing signs of rejuvenation again. But while all of this was happening, the regent left in charge of Quel'Thalas, Lor'themar, was keeping a secret from his prince. Back in their homeland, hidden away, the Sunwell lived on. Lor'themar and his followers kept Anveena and the truth about the lingering power of the Sunwell hidden from Kael'thas because they didn't know what would happen if Anveena's essence was bound back to the destroyed Sunwell, and they feared that Kael'thas might act recklessly if he learned the truth about it. And in time this caution proved justified, because not long after settling in Outland, Kael'thas began carving a new path for himself, one that slowly pulled him away from Illidan and towards the Burning Legion. As Illidan prepared for his own wars, many of the Blood Elf followers in Outland left Kael'thas to pursue their training as demon hunters, mastering fell magic to feed their own magical withdrawal. Kael'thas became convinced he could follow the same path, but the fell energy he drew on began to twist his thoughts, feeding his frustration and paranoia. He slowly grew resentful, convinced that his people saw him as a failure compared to Illidan. At the same time, he also started to realise that Outland had not brought him any closer to finding a cure for the Blood Elves' addiction, and the suffering of his people was only getting worse. In this weakened mental state, Kael'thas was contacted by Kil'jaeden. The Demon Lord promised him untold power and more potent ways to harness the fell magic, Convinced Illidan would abandon the Blood Elves and tempted by Kil'jaeden's promises of salvation, Kael'thas turned to the Demon Lord as his new master. With this shift, Kael'thas took his most loyal followers to the magic-saturated region of Netherstorm. There he claimed it as a base of operations for his new plans and took control of Tempest Keep, a massive dimensional fortress and ship created by the Naaru. The Naaru were beings of pure light and ancient enemies of the Burning Legion. 3 of these Naaru had used Tempest Keep to travel to Outland in hopes of defending the ruined world against their cosmic enemies. One of these Naaru was called Muru. When the Blood Elves learned of Muru's presence and the arrival of Tempest Keep, they raided the fortress and captured the Naaru. In complete awe of Muru's power, Kael'thas ordered that the captured Naaru was to be sent back through a portal to Silvermoon City. It was there that the remaining Blood Elves in Azeroth were instructed to feed on the light of the Naaru to soothe their own magical withdrawal. Seeing what looked like genuine progress coming from their prince, Dath'Remar began to question whether hiding the secret of the Sunwell was the right choice. He then later decided that Kael'thas needed to know the truth. The fact that Anveena existed and that the Sunwell's energies still lingered in Quel'Thalas. Dath'Remar then sent messengers out to Outland to deliver the news of the Sunwell, but they never made it. Agents of Kil'jaeden intercepted them before they could leave their kingdom. Kil'jaeden knew that the truth about the Sunwell would give Kael'thas hope, and hope was the one thing he could not allow. He needed Kael'thas completely broken, isolated, and dependent on the Demon Lord. Meanwhile, not all Blood Elves approved of their prince's actions back in Outland. Seeing the way he treated the Holy Naaru, many became disillusioned and defected. Those who left called themselves the Scryers, and they travelled to Shattrath City to join the other Naaru. By year 26, Horde and Alliance forces had marched through the Dark Portal into Outland. At first, Kael'thas welcomed Blood Elf pilgrims arriving from Azeroth, but some of these new arrivals met the Scryers in Shattrath, and there they were told the truth about their prince, that Kael'thas was building a new army called the Sun Fury, and he had allied himself with the Burning Legion. Word about this was soon sent back to Dath'Remar, and the leaders of Quel'Thalas finally accepted Kael'thas had been lost. They declared that their former prince had become an enemy of the kingdom. They declared war on Kael'thas. Over the next few months, Horde and Alliance forces surrounded Tempest Keep and prepared for a full assault. Tempest Keep was then raided and Kael'thas and his loyalists were defeated. But before Kael'thas could be slain, Kil'jaeden sent one of his priestesses to pull him from the battlefield. And this escape kind of brings all the pieces of this story together. In Netherstorm, Kael'thas had amassed enormous amounts of magic through the Mana Forges, energies he would use in an attempt to summon Kil'jaeden to Azeroth. But it wasn't going to be enough. To complete this ritual, they needed 2 more things. They needed the energy of a Naaru, which they already had back in Silvermoon, and then number 2, they needed the lingering essence of the Sunwell, and Kil'jaeden knew where it was. And so Kael'thas and his Blood Elves were sent back to Quel'Thalas with a single purpose: combine everything they needed and use the revitalized Sunwell to summon Kil'jaeden to Azeroth. While the Alliance and the Horde focused their efforts on the Black Temple, Kael'thas and his Legion allies made their return to Quel'Thalas. He launched a quick and brief assault on Silvermoon City, striking with enough force to retrieve the Naaru, Muru, and then withdrew before the city could fully respond. In the aftermath of this attack, the forces of Shattrath City set aside their differences and formed the Shattered Sun Offensive, a joint force created for one purpose and one purpose only: to put an end to Kael'thas Sunstrider's final, desperate plan. Kael'thas then travelled north to the Isle of Quel'Thalas, fortifying it with demonic and fel-infused forces. With Muru now in his possession and the Isle secured, only one task remained for Kael'thas. His loyalists located Anveena Teague within Quel'Thalas, abducted her, and brought her to the Sunwell Plateau. There, under Kil'jaeden's orders, Kael'thas began the summoning ritual, and draining Anveena's essence directly into the shattered Sunwell, he created the energy needed to tear a path open for Kil'jaeden. During all of this, Anveena was imprisoned within a field of arcane power above the Sunwell, while her strength was slowly siphoned into it. As the ritual continued, the Shattered Sun offensive and the heroes of Azeroth arrived to intervene. What followed was a long and desperate battle against Kael'thas' remaining forces and the rising presence of Kil'jaeden himself. In the heart of the plateau, Anveena realized the truth. The Deceiver was too powerful for mortals to defeat alone. In a final act of sacrifice, she released all of her power at once, weakening Kil'jaeden enough for the mortal champions to banish him back to the Twisting Nether. At this point, Anveena had been lost, but her sacrifice had saved Quel'Thalas. At the same time, raiding parties located Kael'thas and then stormed Magister's Terrace in search of him. The fallen prince was finally confronted and slain by the heroes of Azeroth, ending both his reign as the Sun King and his plan to use the Sunwell as a gateway for Kil'jaeden. With Anveena now gone, the Sunwell's essence returned to its original physical form, but there was still one problem: it was corrupted again. Although Kil'jaeden had been banished, the Sunwell's waters were tainted with his lingering demonic influence, threatening to poison Quel'Thalas again. Just as the late prince had done years before, Dath'Remar Theron considered destroying the Sunwell entirely, but soon enough a different path revealed itself. The Draenei prophet Velen arrived to the Sunwell to honour the death of Muru. From the remains of the fallen Naru, who was slain during the raids on the Sunwell Plateau after being corrupted by the Void, Velen recovered Muru's heart. It was untouched by the corruption that had overtaken its body. Velen used the pure energy of the Naru to cleanse the Sunwell by infusing it with the light of the Naru itself. When the ritual was complete, the Sunwell shone with a new form of power, now infused with both the original arcane energy and the light of a Naru. And for the first time in many years, the Sunwell began pouring its pure energy back into the world. But even after the Sunwell was restored, the turmoil surrounding it was not quite over. For the next several years, the Sunwell remained under heavy protection. It was largely undisturbed, with only a handful of important events taking place around it. One of these was in the 27th year, when the ancient blade Quel'Thalas was recovered and brought to the Sunwell to be cleansed and restored. 5 years after that, a group of Blood Elf paladins used the Sunwell's energy to bless the weapons of their Horde allies, infusing them with the holy strength. It was during this period that many well-known Blood Elves made the journey home to see the restored Sunwell for themselves. Among those was Alleria Windrunner. We won't go into her full story here, but as many of you will already know, Alleria is one of the first Void Elves in existence. Long before that, she had been a Farstrider, one of Quel'Thalas' most respected rangers, until she then departed her homeland to join the Sons of Lothar in their pursuit of the Horde through the Dark Portal. And if you're interested in her part of the Sons of Lothar, we've covered that story in detail in a separate video linked below. After fighting in the Army of Light for 1,000 years from her perspective, and then later mastering the powers of the Void to continue that war against the Legion, Alleria finally returned to Azeroth following the Legion's defeat in the 32nd year. She came home on a political mission, hoping to mend the relationship between the Blood Elves and the Alliance. Before leaving, she requested to see the Sunwell again, the first time in 1,000 years for her. Grand Magister Romath strongly advised against it, wary of her ties to the Void, but being the respected Blood Elf she was, Dath'Remar allowed the visit. Joined by some of Quel'Thalas' most powerful Magisters and leaders, Alleria travelled to the plateau to gaze upon the Sunwell again. But its beauty didn't hold. As she got closer to the waters, Alleria's connection to the Void acted like a beacon. Void creatures flooded into the Sunwell Plateau, attempting to spread their corruption throughout the heart of Quel'Thalas. The defenders at the well managed to stop the Void invasion, but even though they had succeeded in containing this brief threat, the message to Dath'Remar was clear. He declared that Alleria's presence was simply too dangerous for Quel'Thalas. He banished her from her homeland, believing that even unintentionally, she posed a risk to the kingdom and to the Sunwell itself. Now that kind of brings us back to present day, and for the future of the Sunwell, we don't fully know its fate. At this point in time, Xal'atath has slipped past both the champions of Azeroth and her hunter Alleria Windrunner, and all signs point towards her next destination, the kingdom of Quel'Thalas. The story of the Sunwell is one of the longest and most complex threads running throughout the history of Azeroth. From the fall of the Well of Eternity, to the exile of the Highborn, to the founding of Quel'Thalas, and the birth of the High Elves, every era of elven history has been shaped by this single source of power. The Sunwell has been a blessing, a burden, a weapon, and most importantly, a sanctuary. Today, the Sunwell shines again, restored with the combined power of arcane magic and the light of Anaru. But its future is far from certain. Xal'atath is moving towards Quel'Thalas, and if she reaches the Sunwell, its story may enter the most dangerous chapter yet. As Azeroth stands at the edge of a new war, the events at the waters of the Sunwell may once again decide the fate of the world of Warcraft.